Hello and welcome to the third and final lecture on Marxism. Today I want to go into Marx and Engels' philosophy. Marx and Engels' philosophy is known as dialectical materialism, which is basically synthesized or combined the ideas of dialectics and materialism. Ideas of two other German philosophers, Hegel, who came up with the idea of the dialectic, and Feuerbach, the idea of materialism. So Hegel's philosophical system was known as dialectics, which you can think of very simply as meaning the struggle of opposites. He believed that historical progress came about through a struggle between opposing ideas. Each idea, or thesis, was thought to produce an opposite idea called an antithesis. And then the struggle between these two opposing ideas would produce a synthesis. And this is how progress took place. For example, let's take the idea of the divine right of kings, for example, the idea that the king was chosen by God and should therefore have absolute power to rule however he pleased. So this will be our thesis, our initial idea. This thesis produced an antithesis, namely democracy, the idea that in fact people, not kings, should rule. The clash between these two opposing ideas led to a synthesis between the two, which you could see in Britain to be the idea of a constitutional monarchy. Now, Hegel believed that it was conflict between opposing ideas that led to historical progress. In fact, he believed history consisted of the gradual unfolding of what he called the world spirit. This belief, by the way, that history is heading in a certain direction, certain positive direction, towards an end goal, is known as a teleological view of history. Now, Marx and Engels agreed with this view, but only up to a point. Marx agreed with Hegel on the basic principle of the dialectic. That is the idea that history progressed through the struggle of opposites. He agreed with that. But whereas Hegel saw this struggle as taking place on a purely intellectual plane, a struggle between different ideas, Marx saw this struggle as something much more concrete. The struggle, as we saw in the first lecture, the struggle between opposing class forces. Yep, so Hegel, struggle of opposites between conflicting ideas produces progress. Marx, the struggle of opposites between conflicting class forces produces historical progress. Now, Hegel was known as a philosophical idealist. We don't mean here idealist in the sense that he was a hippie tree hugger who believes in peace and love and all that. Idealist in a philosophical sense means someone who believes that ideas shape reality, shape material reality. Yeah, so ideas have kind of primacy, if you like, primary agency, we might say. Agency being the ability to kind of shape things. So the things we see around us, the social institutions, the class formations, etc., are really reflections of and the result of ideas. It's ideas that shape the world. That's what's called an idealist position in philosophy. Now, Marx saw things the other way around. He was a materialist. Again, be careful here. Materialist in the philosophical sense does not mean the same as it does in everyday use. We don't mean Marx was a breadhead who only cared about money and wanted to get a new phone every 5 minutes. Materialism in the philosophical sense means the belief that material reality shapes ideas, not the other way around. Yep. So idealism, ideas shape reality, materialism, material reality itself is what produces ideas. So it's the material conditions of a society and of each class within that society, crucially, that produces the ideas of that society. Remember, we talked about this idea of class interest in the first lecture, how the class interests of each class produce the ideology that that class believes in. It's not their rational sort of thought that produces their ideology, it's their class interest. So this is how Marx saw ideas as coming about, as reflecting the material conditions, particularly of the classes that produce those ideas. So for Marx, it's the material class interests of the bourgeoisie that produces the ideas of liberalism, for example. It's the reality of benefiting from capitalism that leads to ideas about property rights, rather than the idea of property rights leading to capitalism. Yeah, you see what I mean? So this materialism, this idea that material forces shape ideas, came from the philosopher Feuerbach. So this is dialectical materialism, a combination of Hegel's dialectics and Feuerbach's materialism to create this principle that historical change comes about through the struggle of opposing class forces. So in the context of 19th century Europe, Marx and Engels saw that whilst the struggle between aristocracy and bourgeoisie had produced capitalism, the struggle between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat would, they believed, lead to socialism. But this would not be a gradual, orderly process, it would be revolutionary. Okay, so for the second part of this lecture, that was dialectical materialism, done. Hopefully you have a good idea of that now. Second part of this lecture now, I want to move on to discuss why it was that they believed revolution was necessary. So, revolutionary socialists like Marx and Engels, but not only Marxists, there are other revolutionary socialists as well,